So we're gonna get pretty close to the stitch line, but we don't want to cut it too close that it starts coming down. Hey everybody, it's Jacob with Bearded Embroidery, and today we are going to do a mug rug. This is from Sweet Pea. It's the You and Me mug rug, and we're going to do a sew along with this. So thank you for tuning in. This is our first project. We're going to be doing some more like this. As I mentioned, we're doing a sew along. So if you want to do the exact same project that we are doing here, we do have a kit available that will come with all the same fabrics. And then we'll also have a thread kit available that will come with the thread colors used in this sew off as well. But the beautiful thing with embroidery is you can do whatever you want. So if you have spare fabric at home, use that. Use your thread you have. That's great as well. So on over here, so the first thing, this design can be used in a 5x7, 6x10, and 7x12 hoop. So it's very versatile. So a lot of different machines can be able to sew this out. But here are the thread colors that we're using in our kit today. So there's just 5 different threads. But what we need is a stabilizer. So depending upon the size, you're going to need either kind of a soft mesh stabilizer or a tearaway stabilizer. Then you're going to need a piece of batting. So today I'm sewing out the big one. So I've got a big piece of batting here. This is 9x14, I believe. And then you're also going to need 2 pieces of fabric that are the same size. So we've got, this is our background fabric as well as the backing. And this will be in that kit that will be available. And then you're going to need 2 separate colors for the mugs. So we've picked purple and orange. So step 1 here is to get the stabilizer put in your hoop. And we just want to make sure this is tight enough that when we pull on the edges here, we can kind of lift the hoop and it doesn't come out. So we don't need it super tight that you're bending your hoop and possibly breaking your hoop, but we just need it tight enough that it's not going to come out. So we can put our hoop on our machine here. So I'm using the Baby Lock Meridian 2. It's an embroidery only machine. Also, before you get to your machine, you would need to go to Sweet Pea and download this design. We will also have a link for that below. And you'll get that downloaded and transfer it to your flash drive if that's what you prefer, or if you can transfer it via Wi-Fi or anything like that. I'm using a flash drive, so I've already got that plugged into the machine. So now we're gonna go over and find that design. So on this machine, we're gonna hit embroidery. We're going to come down here to our flash drive, and I've created a folder called Bearded Embroidery, and inside that folder is the You and Me mug rug, so I'll click on that. Now we're on kind of our overview screen, so I'm not going to change anything, so I'm just going to hit set. And this is kind of a little edit screen. I'm not going to change anything once again, so I'm going to hit embroidery. And now this kind of layout's kind of nice here because one, we see the whole picture here of what it's going to look like, but up in the right-hand corner here, we see exactly what step we're on with that thread color. So I know that this is stitching down the batting basically. So our next step here is to place the batting on top of our hoop, and we're going to kind of center this so we know that's going to get covered. And after that, so I'm using a cream color, as you can see on the background here. So I don't know, I'm using the cream for the background. So I'm just going to use this cream to stitch down the batting. I don't know if it necessarily matters which color you use, but I'm going to use this neutral color here. So I'm going to put my foot down and hit start. So right now we're stitching out a line that we're going to now place our background fabric over. So step 2 here is to take your background fabric here and we're going to place it over this stitch line. So I'm not going to rethread, I'm going to use the same color. So all I need to do on this machine is put my foot down and hit start. And that's going to stitch down our background fabric. Okay, so we finished stitching down our background fabric here. So our next step here, as you can see on the screen here, is our kind of background stitching on the background, or like the quilting. So that's going to be all the stitching in the background here that we're going to do. So I decided to do that with the cream color because it matches the background pretty good. So I, once again, will not be needing to change my thread. So I'm just going to start the machine again. Alright, so now that we've done our background stitching here, or your quilting if that's what you want to call it, we're going to be moving on to part of the handle here. So our next step here is to do this little tiny part of the handle here, which I've done in purple. So, which means I need to put my purple thread in. So there's quite a few color changes here. So you're going to get very good at threading your machine, which is a good thing. So don't be afraid of it. And we're going to put our purple thread on here. So we're threading. Make sure you get that in the take-up lever, otherwise you're going to have issues. And then normally, anytime before you use a needle threader, you would want to do a needle up down just to make sure that needle is in the correct position. But because this machine always stops in the up position, the needle should be where it needs to be for the needle threader. So I'm just going to use the needle threader here. Thread my needle, threaded beautifully. And so now I've got my purple thread in. I'm just going to start it back up. And so that little part of the handle down here, we're now done sewing that little section of the handle for mug 1. So our next section here is sew this other little section of mug 2. So this is going to be the upper portion here, which I have in orange. So I need to change my thread to orange. Thread my needle with my handy dandy threader and put the foot down and start it up again. All right, so now that we've done this little orange section of the handle for mug 2, we're going to go back and finish off the handle for mug 1. So we're going to switch back to our purple thread here and stitch out the rest of the handle for mug 1. So I'm going to rethread my machine with purple thread, and you would be threading it with whatever color you decide, because you do not have to do the exact same thing that I'm doing here. But if you would like to do the exact same thing, we do have a fabric kit and thread kit available on our webpage in the link in the description below. Love this needle threader because it threads it perfectly every time. So I'm ready to sew again, so we're going to put the foot down and hit start. All right, now that we're done with that section of the handle for mug 1, our next step is to sew the other section for mug 2 of the handle. So that's going to be orange here. So I need to rethread my machine with orange thread. got thread everywhere over here. That's awesome. Struggling. Nice. Thread that needle. Love watching that every time. All right, put our foot down and hit start. All right, so our last step here on the handles, so we just finished up our orange handle here, the big piece. Our last step here is to do the red work stitch kind of on the outer edge of the purple handle. So we need to put our purple thread back in our machine. Thread the needle. Got my purple thread threaded, so I'm gonna sew that red work stitch on the purple handle. Alright, I got a little tail here, so I'm going to trim this before we go too much further here. Alright, so our next placement is to start on the mugs. So the first part here, as you can see here, you got the two mugs. Basically we're stitching out the die line or the placement line on where we're going to place our fabrics for the mugs. So I decided I was going to just do the placement line in cream just to make sure that that thread isn't seen through these fabrics. So I'm going to reload the machine with our cream thread and we'll stitch out these placement lines. Greg's trying to keep up with me. All right. Thread our needle with our cream, and we're gonna sew these placement lines for the mugs. All right, so our next step here is to place our fabric for mug 1. So for my project here, I chose orange for mug 1. So I'm just going to place my orange fabric and make sure I'm covering that placement line kind of equally, if you will, so that it doesn't pull out anywhere. So I will be changing over to my orange thread. So I've placed my fabric. Now I'm going to change back over to my orange thread to stitch this fabric down. Thread my needle with my orange thread. I've got my orange fabric down there for mug 1. So all I need to do is stitch that fabric down. So I'm going to put my foot down and hit start. All right, our orange fabric is stitched down. So our next step here before we kind of move on is to trim this fabric. So let me pull this over here. We're going to switch to our top-down view here. So as you can see here, we've got a bunch of fabric here, and eventually we're going to be doing this satin stitch around the mug. So if we didn't trim this fabric off, it would look pretty goofy. So the next thing we're going to do is remove our hoop, and anytime we're removing the hoop or messing with the hoop, we want to be as careful as possible. So as you can see here, I've got it on a flat surface, so we don't want to be putting it on top of anything that might push from the center up. We want to keep our fingers from pushing the back up. Basically anything to shift this in the hoop, we want to prevent that from happening, because as soon as this shifts, then this whole thing is off. Basically you're going to have to start all over. It'd be very hard to realign everything. So anytime you're messing with the hoop, you want to be as careful as possible. So I've got on my flat surface here, and we're going to trim this excess off about 1 millimeter from the stitched line. So to do that, I've got my handy dandy duckbill scissors here. These are Quilter Select. I really like these ones because they come to a point at the end, so you can really get into some of those corners and stuff when you're trimming. So we're going to trim this off. And I'm right-handed, so I'm going to keep kind of just rotating this around so it's comfortable for me. And then you do have some scraps here, but we're going to hang on to that because we're going to use a little bit more when we do some other stitching. Get very close here. All right. So our next step here that you can see on the screen here is the coffee. So coffee or tea, or whatever you like. So for that, I had chosen a brown thread because I like coffee. So I need to load my brown thread on the machine. So I'm going to take out my orange thread and put the brown thread on. Thread our needle. Got a little thread here. I'm going to get out of the way before it gets stitched down. So I'm got my machine with the brown thread in it, so I'm ready to sew. So we're going to hit the start button and sew our coffee. coffee has been sewn for mug 1. So our next step here is to basically start over on mug 2. So we have already stitched out our placement line for mug 2. So now we need to stitch down our fabric for mug 2. So in my example here, or my project here, I have my purple fabric. So I need to place my purple fabric over the placement line pretty evenly. And then I'm gonna take out my brown thread and put in my purple thread to stitch it down as I throw my brown thread. That's pretty cool. Just giving it to Greg. All right, now that my machine has its purple thread in, we are ready to sew. All right, we've stitched down our fabric for mug 2, which is my purple fabric. So we need to take the hoop back off again to trim the excess fabric off around mug 2. So we're gonna get pretty close to the stitch line, but we don't want to cut it too close that it starts coming out. Once again, we want to be careful when we're playing with the hoop that we do not shift anything and put pressure where it could shift things. All right, so we've trimmed our fabric off of mug 2, so we're gonna load it back on and we're gonna sew the coffee for mug 2, which means I need to take my purple thread off the machine and load the brown thread for the coffee. All right, now my machine has the brown thread in it, so I'm ready to sew again. All right, so our next step here is to sew the placement lines for the applique on the mugs. So I'm just gonna leave the brown thread that I've used for my coffee in to sew those lines. So I just need to hit start again. right, so I have a little thread tail here that I want to get rid of before I move any further. Our next step here is to stitch down the fabric of the applique in mug 1. So I will be switching to my purple fabric here on the orange mug. So I'm just going to use some of this scrap here that we trimmed off when we stitched down the mugs themselves. And you're just going to find a piece big enough that's going to cover that whole area where that placement line is. It's close on this side. I'm off too far. Yeah, that should be good. All right, so I've got my purple fabric laid down, but I want to switch to my purple thread. So I'm going to take this brown thread off that we used to stitch out those placement lines, and we're going to put our purple thread back on. Use our handy dandy needle threader. All right, now that we've got our purple thread loaded, we are good to stitch down our applique for mug 1. All right, so our next step here is to take our hoop off and trim off any excess around this here. I'll show you on our top-down view here. So now, once again, like we did with the mugs, we need to trim off this excess around this part of the heart. And we want to be about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters away from the stitching line so that there's enough fabric there that doesn't come apart. Be careful when you getting inside here that you're not cutting the fabric underneath of it. This is a little trickier to trim. Take your time. Got some fuzz. next step is to do the same thing that we did on this applique. We're just going to do the same steps we did on this applique for mug 2. So we already stitched our placement line, so I'm going to find some scrap to place over that placement line, and then we're going to stitch it down. All right, so I need to take my purple thread out and load my orange thread for this. All right, so my orange thread is loaded, so now I'm ready to sew to stitch down this fabric for the applique. So put my foot down and hit start. All right, so we've stitched down the applique for mug 2, which is my orange fabric. So now we need to remove the hoop and trim this excess fabric from this applique. Once again, you want to trim this about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters from the stitch line. We want to make sure there's enough fabric there that's not just going to fall apart. But we don't want too much that when we do this decorative satin stitch around it, that fabric is showing on the outside of it. And once again, just be careful when you are playing with your hoop that you do not loosen anything so that your design gets off, because that would be very disappointing. So take your time. Got some fabric fuzz. All right, so our next step is to sew our decorative stitch around that applique. So we're going to put the hoop back on the machine. And we do not need to change our thread because we just stitched it down with orange, and we're going to do that decorative satin stitch with orange. So we just need to put our foot down and start sewing again. So our next step here, after we've sewn our decorative satin stitch on mug 2, so we just got done sewing this. Our next step here is to sew this decorative stitch on both mugs. So right here along the outside. So I decided to use cream thread. So right now I have orange thread in the machine, so I need to switch it over to cream. You can do whatever color you would like there. I was trying to just keep this down to 5 colors. So I decided to use the cream again. All right, we are threaded again with cream thread, so we are ready to sew. So we just got done stitching out the decorative kind of lace stitch on the outside of the mugs. So our next step here is to do this satin stitch around mug 2 here. So I have my cream thread in, so I need to swap it out to my purple thread and we can start sewing again. All right, so my needle now has purple thread in it, so I'm ready to sew the satin stitch around mug 2. All right, so we just completed the satin stitch on mug 2 here, which was our purple. So the next step here is to do the satin stitch on our mug 1. So I need to take out my purple thread and switch it on over to my orange thread. So we are done stitching out the satin stitch on mug 1, which is our orange. I can't say the word. So our next step here is to stitch out the words you and me and time. You can do 2 separate colors here if you would like. I decided to just keep them the same. Once again, I was trying to do this in 5 colors. But if you want to do different colors, you can. So I need to take my orange thread out and switch on over to our teal thread here. So we're going to be starting with stitching out the you and me part first, and then it'll move on down to the time. All right, we got our teal thread loaded, and so we are ready to start sewing again. All right, so we're getting close to the end here. One of our last steps is to sew the backing on. So the background we put right side up. Our backing, when we put this, we're going to put this all over the whole thing. We're going to put the right side down. So that's a very important thing. So we're going to come back over here and we're going to put our fabric, make sure it's not folding up in there. Put our fabric right side down or wrong side up. And our next step is to stitch this backing down. And there's kind of two parts to it. So one, I need to put my cream thread back on, but it's gonna stitch down the backing, it's gonna stop, and then the final step is to then do a triple stitch to really make sure that this mug rug is gonna stay together and not fall apart on us. So I'm gonna put the cream thread back on the machine. All right, we're threaded with our cream thread again, so we are ready to start sewing. All right, so it just stitched down the backing, so the last step here is to do that triple stitch. So we're just gonna put the foot down and sew again. So we are done with the sew out. So kind of the last step here is we're gonna take the hoop off here. So we're gonna take the hoop off here. We're gonna take this out of the hoop. I'm gonna find my knob here. Yeah, maybe. Jeez. Get that tight, He-Man. Did you use a screwdriver?
It wasn't working well, so I used the small one.
Oh.
Like little thing. Needle place.
All right. So got my hoop off. We're gonna take our project out of the hoop. You can put the hoop off to the side. So I'm gonna kind of tear this excess stabilizer away here, just so we can see a little better what we're doing here. So so our last step here is to trim this down. So we want to trim this down 1/4 inch from this seam here. It might be a little hard to see. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. So our stitch line here, we want to trim this 1/4 inch from it. So I've got a rotary cutter and a little ruler here. And we're going to line our stitch line up with our 1/4 inch mark here on the ruler. And then we're going to trim all that off. So we're going to go around the 3 sides here. And then on the 4th side, because it is where the little opening is, we're not going to trim all the way across. We're actually going to leave a little flap. The mat wasn't long enough this way. Okay, let me rotate it here. There we go. Once again, 1/4 inch on this side. So this is the side that our stitch line only goes this far. So all this right here is not stitched. So we can cut 1/4 inch in, basically to the end of those stitched lines. Like I gotta rotate this whole thing, because I don't know, I'm right-handed and this is weird. Let me cut backwards. How does that sound? So the next part is I'm just going to kind of cut this batting away, actually. So I'm just going to fold both fabrics up here, and we can just do that 1/4 inch along here. Actually, hold on here. Scratch that. I'm just going to cut these at an angle here with the scissors. So I'm going to create like a little kind of flap here, if you will. So I cut those off. And I cut this other side off. I don't need this batting here, so I'm going to flip my fabric up and just cut this excess off here. So now we're kind of left with these 2 fabric flaps here. And this is what we're going to use when we turn this right side out, that we have enough in here to basically stitch it closed. So now we are ready to turn this thing right side out. Just kind of shove it through that opening there. And to really get these corners pushed out, like a chopstick works really well, or a stiletto. I have this thing's called a purple thing, so we can try that. I can try and get my fingers as much into these corners to push out. See if I can get my fingers in this corners here. So get these nice and pushed out. Look at that. So once you get that to where you like it, then you would put it on your ironing board, which I do not have one set up right now. You would set that on your ironing board. You're going to iron that down really good. You're going to make sure your little fabric flaps are tucked in here nice. And then I would probably do this one of two ways. You could either hand stitch this closed to seal that up, or what I would probably do, because I'm lazy maybe, would be to basically just do a top stitch right along the edge with my sewing machine and just stitch around this whole thing to close this hole. Other than that, you are completed with the You and Me mug rug. This is once again from Sweet Pea Designs. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully it was help you get through the sewing, get it completed. I would love to see the completed projects. If you want to see more of this stuff in the future, make sure you like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, turn the bell on so you're notified when we post new content. We're going to be doing more sew-alongs. Hopefully we can get Greg here involved a little more, who's behind the camera here. But other than that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.